Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Beat the Big Guys. Hi, I'm Sandy Rosenthal, and I'm so excited about my guest, who I haven't seen in a few years. Her name is Cherri Foytlin. Hello, Cherri. How are you today?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
If I were better, I don't know what I'd do. But I've got you here with me. But I know you well, but our listeners don't, or some of our listeners might not. So I'm going to fill them in for just the next few seconds right now. Cherri is an Afro-Indigenous organizer, writer, speaker, and mother of six who lives in Northwest Mexico. She's the author of Spill It, The Truth About the Deepwater Horizon Oil Rig Explosion. In the spring of 2011, she walked from Washington, D.C. from New Orleans, which is 1,243 miles, to call for action regarding the BP deepwater drilling disaster. Thank you for doing that, Cherri.
Yeah, yeah.
More recently, she founded L'Eau et la Vie Camp, which means water for life, helping to lead a direct action campaign to stop the Bayou Bridge pipeline. Additionally, she has created and maintains NDN Bayou Food Forest, a South Louisiana land project which allows for community organizing space, disaster mutual aid support, and growing and gifting of traditionally nurtured organic produce. Well, that is amazing resume. I'm just so delighted to have you. And I'd like to share with our listeners, I read recently while I was doing a little research for today that you were recently called public enemy number one in Louisiana. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it was hard fought.
It takes a lot of work to be named public enemy number one in Louisiana. So you must be doing something good.
Right. Thank you.
You must be up to some good. And I look forward to hearing a lot more about it. Our listeners too, I know. So, and before we start, you and I, the last time we worked together was in March of 2016. And you and I and hundreds of others were at the Superdome protesting the sale of new drilling permits in the Gulf of Mexico.
Right. I remember.
What a day. And you know what I'll never forget, Cherri, is when the police, and there were lots of police that day, brought in those 3-foot long zip ties. And they had hundreds and hundreds of these zip ties. They were planning on arresting people that day.
I think at least they wanted us to know that, to think that.
Well, it worked.
Yeah.
It was a scary sight. And do you mind if I ask, were you prepared to be arrested that day?
Actually, I very rarely do I go into something thinking that I'm going to be arrested. I have been arrested 18 times to date
Wow.
for various things. And like I said, just maybe one or two of those did I know I was going to get arrested. No, the plan is not to get arrested. But yeah, I mean, I also know when I go into situations like that there's a chance, like, because these the police and the state, like, they're going to defend and protect the corporations, which is part of the problem. So yeah.
18 times you've been arrested.
Yeah.
And you just told our guests that no, you never plan on being arrested, and it managed to happen 18 times.
Yeah.
Wow. I wish we had time to go over all 18. And maybe you'll talk about one or two of those examples today. But what we really want to do is give stories of empowerment to our listeners who have big guys in their own neighborhoods that they need to stand up against, and they need help, they need support, they have nothing to fear, especially since we're here to help them. So Cherri, why don't you start by sharing one of your favorite stories, or maybe two, where you stood up against the big guy and either outright won or certainly made big steps in that direction.
So I think when we were fighting the Bayou Bridge pipeline, which was the tail end of the Dakota Access Pipeline, it was built by Energy Transfer Partners, who is the same company that have built the Dakota Access Pipeline. We had a lot of legal wins all along the way, and we took just like all of the above approach. From the beginning, we started organizing in communities. We started talking to landowners and things like that, and then And then we went to like petitions, going to those, they have those meetings and things like that, for public meetings. We organized getting people there and all that stuff. And then over time, when we realized that there was nothing more we could do, or pretty much nothing more we could do, and we had gone the legal avenue, we were talking to landowners up and down the line, and I happened to see a piece of property that was in the way of the pipeline. And I thought to myself, like, we had been talking for years about how we would like to have a space for just transition where we could teach local kids and we could just, just be on the land and grow food and all that. And so when I saw it, I just knew it was like it was the place for us, So we went and got donations from everywhere and we bought it. And that became L'eau est la vie camp, which means water is life in French. Because we were in the deep south, and and there's a lot of Cajun French people around us, so we wanted to be able to connect with people, and so we did. And the first thing we did is we got the people whose land it really is, which is the Atakapa Ishak Nation. We went into ceremony with them to ask permission to use the space, which they gave us. And from then we started this resistance camp, and it took us we fought this pipeline for like 2 years, basically from beginning to end. And yeah, so it finally got to the point where everything, they were going through, they had hired people from different, like the people that are jailers in jails. They hired the local police departments, like the company directly hired them, and they used them against us. So basically, the company was able to hire a militia to work against people who were just exercising their First Amendment right?
Free speech.
Yeah, exactly. And so, so we started doing direct actions. And the thing about it was, in South Louisiana, it can be very dangerous because there's a lot of right wingers there. There's a lot of people who work for the oil industry, or their family works for the oil industry. So even you'll find people who are against the oil industry or against something, but they can't really express that, or don't feel good about expressing that because they're family, right? So even they will stand aside and let bad things happen because they of loyalty, which I get loyalty. So I don't get killing the planet. But anyway, so we started having, this is what we talk about a lot when you're thinking about taking on a big corporation. It doesn't have to be a lot of times the media and films and things will show like this big angry group of people, and sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes it's important to express your anger. But we always thought, in this case, we were usually allowed to be on land that we were on. We had the landowner's permission usually, and we thought, man, we just want to bring joy back to this. And so we played ball on the easement. We had a whole show called a Crawfish the Musical, which was a full-length musical that was, I know it was full-length, but it was a good 30-minute musical that we did on the easement. And the workers actually stopped and watched us, and at the end they clapped. And I thought it was so funny that these workers were clapping for the show. We actually did an encore performance. The day ended and the pipeline didn't go through that day. So but the best part about that was, years later, after we had done a much more serious direct action, where we were out in the swamp in the Atchafalaya Basin trying to save the territory out there, and we had really the police just pounded on us, and were very violent towards us. After all this is over, and I actually had to leave South Louisiana. That's why I live in northern New Mexico, because the death threats became too much. They were physically violent, things like that. So after I left, I'd been up here for a little bit. I read this article, and in the article it said that there was a man, and he was starting a solar energy panel company. He was starting that, And in the article, he said that he had been working for pipelines, and he was on an easement one day in South Louisiana, and a group of protesters came and put on a show. And when the show was done, he thought to himself, how am I contributing to the problem, and how can I fix it? And I realized, at that point, it proved something that had been told to me a long time ago, which is you will never know your own legacy. You cannot know that. And that was like one of my biggest wins. I still think about it to this day. I had no idea that's where we were going, but now there's a solar company in South Louisiana that was started by an ex-pipeline worker because we put on a show and also stopped the pipeline for several hours. It was great. It was really, really great. I always believe that when people see courage, they do courageous things. And I think like for Loe La Vie, part of our goal, part of why we were there was to just express in a place that had not experienced that before, the impact of standing up and just saying no. I mean, people don't say no to these pipeline companies in South Louisiana, and a lot of places actually. They're not allowed to. Even if they do, the company will come in and take the land, you know, and give them very little money. Like they seize the property and able to, you know, to do that, you know, at least to put the easement in. And so I think a lot of it was just of our successes was just being seen as having a direct action in South Louisiana and fighting for this company with against this company, this dangerous company, with everything that we had. And I feel like that inspired other things. I've heard of other people standing up, like they just beat Formosa and St. James. We worked with St. James a lot, you know, and I just, yeah, I think that was good. Now, on the other thing that we got out of that, that I'm so proud of, is that we took the property where Loe La Vie was, and we started something called Indian Bayou Food Forest. It's in Indian Bayou, Louisiana. And what we've done there has been able to create a living ecosystem that provides food for families. And a lot of these families live in environmental justice communities. So their ground, their soil is not really good anymore to grow things in. A lot of them talk about how their gardens their grandma used to have and how clean the air was. Well, now there's so many facilities up and down the Mississippi, it's hard to grow anything. And so we've been able to produce things to support them and people. And, you know, we've provided so one thing I didn't even think about is we provided seeds and plants. And after the hurricane, we've been like really helping people replant their yards with fruit trees and things like that. And we did a lot of mutual aid. So that space right there to me is a win. And I've Googled before and I found places where they say, oh, Loe La Vie lost. But how could we lose when we gathered that much resource and wealth for the movement itself so that people can stay there? And that's what I really want people to think about, is past the fight you have at hand. Now, I know it's important because you get sucked in there and you just focus on the struggle that you have in front of you. But when it comes down to it, how are you building for the next generation to take over? Because the thing about it is, we're going to have wins, we're going to have losses, but we're just basically a link in the chain. It's like the next generation, my kids are now already standing up and moving into the movement. And there was definitely, we're standing on the back of our ancestors and people behind us, right? So I try not to take things in a way that it's finite. Like if I lose, that I've lost forever, or that if I win, that I win forever, because a lot of times that's not how it works out. But we have to celebrate what we have. We have to find joy in what we do. And we have to continue to inspire people and not worry about what other people are thinking, do take people into consideration, but I'm just saying, you are going to be mocked. You are going to be called a fruit basket, or whatever you call it. This is going to happen, People who were your friends are not going to be your friends. People who you thought were on your peripheral and wasn't really your friends are going to be right behind you, standing up. People are going to lie on you. People are going to, but is it worth it is the question. And when is doing good in this world for any good thing, for any motivation that is positive and nonviolent and supportive and loving, comes from a loving place, bad? It's just not even possible.
That was beautiful. I need to take this and frame it. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. I mean, if I were to end this right now, which I won't, because we're going to go back and talk further, we have these gems and jewels and great advice right now for everyone to hear. And so, what I'm going to do in the next couple of minutes is we're going to go back and just touch on a few of the things you said, which were so important that they need to be filled out just a little bit. And I'm going to start with, I think there's so many good things, but I think one of the things I'm going to jump in first was, you had already won and you didn't know it.
Right.
That when you moved away, and when it turns up that you're talking about that incident where you had a performance, and then you were applauded by the oil companies, by the oil workers, and it turned up that day you'd already won, but you didn't know it. Yeah. So in the climax of my book, Words Whispered in Water, it's the same thing. I had already won and I didn't know it. And I cried myself to sleep for weeks because I thought I'd lost, and it turned up I hadn't. But if I'd have given up, I would have lost. For sure. And I didn't give up. And that's the climax of my book. And that is so, so important. Everything you do is important, and you really won't know until later what was more important than the other. Everything you do is important. I just love that so much. So, and thank you for telling us listeners about that. So can you tell us a little bit about that ceremony, that ceremony where you got permission for the land use from the native tribes? Can you just talk a little bit more about that? That sounds really interesting.
Well, I'm a Native woman. I'm Dene and Black. And so one of the things that is in our, like, I don't know, like what we do is we make sure, or try to make sure, especially when we're in a community, that we ask permission of the original peoples that were there in one way or another. And sometimes that means going to the tribe. Sometimes that means like just a spiritual reflection. Of course, there are people who do like land recognition, and that's good too. In this case, we brought everybody together, and we had just like food, and we sat in ceremony and just talked, and they expressed us, like, we were able to deepen our understanding around the genocide that happened on that land, as far as like in relation to what was happening in the world at that time during colonization, and which still exists. And yeah, so it was really, really nice. And we had the chief come out, and I think it was the tribe historian, and they sat with us, and at the end we just basically straight up just asked them, like, we'd like your permission to work from this space, to do this just transition space, but also to fight this pipeline, and they were more than welcome to have that happen, and express that. And they've been out a couple of times since, just to check on everything, make sure we're good, and we have good relationships with them, And I think that's
of that important. That respect and the sit down, and
you got to take the time.
You have to, and and I can relate with that as well. When I started levees.org, the very first event we held was in the Lower Ninth Ward, and I did get permission from a homeowner to use her front yard for my press event, but that wasn't enough. I also got permission from the Neighborhood Homeowners Association, from one of the Neighborhood Empowerment Associations, and I got permission from several other leaders in the neighborhood. Even though I had permission for the piece of land I was standing on, that's not enough. Right. And by taking that extra step, this is crucial, you gain this trust of these people who will be there for you down the road when more work needs to be done. So this is a really important lesson for all of you out there who are working within a community of people. Right. And most big guys are with a community of people. I love the way, Cherri, you pointed out, you have to have joy. You are so right about that. You can't live in anger, and you can't live that way. You have to live with joy. And in my case, real quick, I looked for joy, within my family and my girlfriends. And no matter how busy I was, and I was always busy, I worked 24/7, 365. Right. I found time for family and my girlfriends. And so how did you find joy? I know once you took the kids to Rock and Bowl and went bowling. I remember hearing you tell that story. That was a really interesting story that day, by the way. But can you share other ways that you keep the joy in your life?
Yeah, definitely the kids help a lot, because they're young and just fun. They're just really good kids. They're just great kids. Just worked out like that. But yeah, that's hard. It is really hard to doing this kind of work. And then like it's just like any other working parent. When you go, I'm a single parent of 6. When you go away from them, you feel bad, and then when you're there, you feel like you should be working. That's just the way it is to be a woman in 2021. But um yeah, I definitely I have a good, really tight schedule. And, I try to make time within that schedule for things to happen. And then also I have a, kind of a rule for myself. And that is, if the kids like need something or something, I'm just going to look at them and give them that attention, like just until they're finished, and then I can go back, which
Look them in the
sometimes
eye, you mean? Yeah. Yeah.
but you got to do it. And so, yeah, so they bring me a lot of joy, and I try to make time for that. And when I go somewhere, a lot of times I'll take one with me. Other times I've taken all of them, but when I take one, I really enjoy that, because you get to spend a lot more time and just really talking about things and experiencing new places. And I think it's so important that kids travel. I just think that is just so decisive in who they're going to be and how they're going to relate to the world,
Because
so
if you
it's
don't,
been really fun.
if you don't, you will burn out.
Oh, for sure.
You will burn out. You've got to keep the joy in your soul.
For sure.
And those are all great examples that you shared, and I really appreciate that. So
also have a good dog. I have a great dog.
That's good advice too. I've got 2. So you said something I've never heard before, and it's so interesting. I wonder if you could elaborate a little more. You mentioned how courage creates more courage.
It's true.
Which I think is just so interesting, and I can understand how that could happen. But can you give us some examples where you saw that happening, where you saw courage creating more courage in other people?
I mean, I think it's very courageous for someone who only has one job most of their life, probably like that pipeline worker, to completely change the way he does things and just change not just his perspective, but how he interacts with humanity and how he shows up in this world. That's amazing. Like, that's heroic. And then I also feel like with a lot of the work that we had done, we saw, like, again, it's almost impossible to fight the pipeline companies in South Louisiana. And we saw landowners that really felt like they had something behind them. And I know it was us. Like when we had the big thing out in the Atchafalaya Basin, where the cops were throwing us down and pulling us off, each energy transfer partner did not have permission to be on that land, but the landowners had given us permission. It's unfortunate that the cops, the police, worked for the company at that time in their full police gear as policemen, and that they like, basically arrested the people who were there with permission and left the people that were there without permission to continue their work and tear up the land. Right. And the first time they fought that, they only had to pay like 100, ETP only had to pay a fine of 100 and some odd dollars. They went back and appealed, and I think they got more than that. I think 10 grand or something like that, but something more, which is like good. I mean, I guess it's some kind of consequence for the company. I'm not sure why. $10,000 to ETP is just like
nothing,
nothing. but yeah. And so like, I saw these landowners stand up. Also, like people within the tribe who have been feeling, different tribes like United Home Nation, Taco Ishak, who had been feeling, I think, kind of alone as far as like the way they felt about things, about the earth, about the swamp, about things. And I think it just gave them like this just a little bit of you got people behind you, you got people at your back, and we definitely did let them lead, like in their territories, like wherever they wanted and supported that, they were able to support, but also keep that, distance, because they're still trying to get recognition and things like that, and so let us take that. So that's kind of my role, I think, in this larger movement, always has been, is that, rather than the people that are on the ground, like sometimes with their permission, of course, but rather than them taking the hard knocks, like there was a certain point in there that we were working with people and we would never present ourselves with those people or whatever. We told them, let us take the hard knocks and push this company to what they will perceive as less radical, and then y'all make the deal for yourself, for your community. Basically, you're just providing the labor and the space for the corporations to feel that kind of uncomfortability. Now, that's an important role, but it's definitely not as important. I mean, it's definitely equally important to the people who are on the other side of that table, who are making the deals and able to go into the governor's office and able to do those things. Because once you start doing like direct action, doors close, right? Other doors open, but some doors close. And that's okay, as long as you have someone else that you're working with and you're so invested in that community, and they're invested in you and they're invested in the struggle, because they'll pick up that part of the fight and you can do whichever you want. And everybody is so important. We would never have been able to do that camp without the cooks in the kitchen, the people that were doing the dishes, the people that were mowing the lawn and making sure that the living, getting people tickets to come, or helping with local organizing. All of those things were so important. It's not just a situation where you're like, us go to jail. You know what I'm saying? Again, right, I don't do that on purpose, but it's definitely not always a situation. Like, it can be, but mostly it's not,
Right.
Yeah.
And fortunately, often it's the threat of arrest.
Right.
The big guys use that as a threat to stop people from standing up to them. And
right.
So fortunately, often that's what it is. You mentioned, Cherri, something else that I thought was so important that I wanted to go back to it for just a minute. And that was where you said you need to prepare for the future. Okay. Your children and their children. That is the only reason that I wrote a book, because right. I knew I wasn't going to be here forever. So that's why I wrote a book. And believe me, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. Not only write it and then find a publisher. Very, very difficult. I'm glad I did it, but that's why I did it. For our children's children. No one can, online trolls can't ever delete my book. Okay. Right. My book is there forever. So that is really important. And so can you talk a little bit more about other ways that you built for the future, that you thought about what you could do for your children's children?
Yeah, definitely. When I first started this, like, a lot of people, like, they went to school to work in the nonprofit sector or something like that, which I have nothing against. It's great. They knew very young that they wanted to make a difference, and that's wonderful. I was a mother. I had 6 children. My youngest at that time, when I first started this, was 3, and my oldest was, I want to say, like 13. And so, like, I had children, and I didn't have any intention. I mean, I would write a check to Greenpeace and call it done. Like, I did my part, even though I loved the environment. I grew up out in the woods. I loved being in it, and I knew it needed protected, but, like, that wasn't my priority at the moment. Well, when the BP oil spill happened, I was working as a writer for a small town paper. I was doing feature writing, and we had an opportunity. BP took a lot of the press people out and would show them around. So we had an opportunity to be on one of those BP tours. So I went out with the group and I looked around, and they showed us a little oil, and we talked to the governor, we talked to like the LSU coach at the time and things like that. They showed oil birds, but we didn't talk to anybody who was going to be actually affected by this. We didn't talk to any fisher folk. We didn't talk to any business owners. We didn't talk to anybody like that. And I'm a features writer, which means I write about people. And so I went back down my own dime the next weekend, and I asked a person with a fisher boat to take me out, shrimp boat, take me out. And so I probably in cash, I don't remember, but the point is, he took me out, and him and his little boy. And we were out there for a little bit, and then we camp on like this big patch of oil, and very quickly the oil just kind of surrounded the boat. You can't move very fast in oil. And so pretty soon we came upon a pelican that was in the water, and the pelican was like, convulsing. At the time, we thought we could take that pelican and we could get to Fort Jackson, where they were cleaning birds at that time. And at a certain point, we realized we couldn't go that fast in it, and this pelican was not going to make it. And so we all just, the fisher person he just shut down the boat, and we all just sat there around this bird as it passed away. And I remember listening, and there was like no sounds. And I've been out there so many times, and it's just teeming with life. It's so loud. Sometimes you have to like yell to the person that's right next to you, just because of all the life happening around you. It was dead silent. It was nothing. And I went home that night. The Fisher person, like, he started crying. Like, he was a big old Cajun dude, you know, and his little boy started crying. And so I started crying. And it was just the impact. Like, we really felt it. Like, we really got the impact. He thought that his livelihood was gone for the rest of his life. And honestly, it was, because he ended up having to move. And I thought, wow, we messed this up, you know, and is it going to come back? I don't know, you know. And I went home that night. I remember all the kids were asleep. My ex, it was my husband at the time, he was asleep. And I went to the bathroom and washed my face. And I remember just looking in the mirror, and I said, how have I contributed to this? What have I not done? Like, what is my self responsibility? And what in the heck am I going to leave these babies when I go? Because it wasn't just a disaster of environmentalism. It was a disaster of the whole entire system, like of the economy, the fact that everybody was just mono, like there was just one economy, and when it broke, it broke everybody, you know. And the whole idea about the system, they didn't know how to clean up a spill. Like, they didn't even know how to stop it for 28 days, remember?
Oh,
And
yes.
it was just like really messed up. And that's when I decided right then that I'm going to participate. I'm going to participate in protecting life, right? And yeah, so that's what I did. And one thing just led to another. We did like an art show, we did the walk, we did, you know. And when I did the walk, that was a big wake up call too, because as we walked from New Orleans to Washington D.C. to like bring up attention to the spill that was still happening. By that time, Obama had said it was over, but it wasn't. And hold on one second. Oh my God. Yeah, and so we did the walk, and I remember walking. This is when I really like. There's been times in this whole thing that I've just been like, I've had my eyes just slapped wide open, you know. And I was walking, and as I did, I would go through this one town, and the town would say, yeah, well, you know, we're fighting this uranium mine. I go to another town, and they'd be like, yeah, they're doing mountaintop removal here. And then here, like, this other thing was happening. There's poverty. I was just like, what the heck, you know, like, what is happening? And I went to this one town in particular. I remember they were doing uranium mining, and I said, they told me this whole spiel and everything, and I was just really, you know, concerned for them. But they were like underprivileged Black community, right? I go up the street by like 8 miles, and I come to another community which is mostly middle class white, and they said, oh yeah, we had this uranium mine that was going to come here, but we got rid of it. And I said, well, how did you get rid of it? And they said, oh well, we voted someone into office that was on the city council just so they could, you know, kick this thing out. Well, in the other community, they didn't have those opportunities because they didn't have the resource, and they darn sure not have the time from trying to survive to actually put into like organizing and making things happen. And I thought to myself, well, we need to get one group with the other group. And so they can't just switch on us. They can't just go from one place to the other. It's not a win if it just moves from one community to the other community. Yeah, that's how we think about, like, when we think about like future generations, and we think about like also within the movement, when I was talking about the property, the land that we got, it's also thinking like, how can we set them up, the people who are coming behind us, with the most opportunity. So by having this land, not only are we providing food sovereignty and food for people, we're also using that as organizing tools in order to get people together and get people talking and educated and really, really listen. That's so important. And yeah, so that's what I'm thinking about when I think about the
Incredibly
next
inspiring. I am
generation.
so inspired right now. I feel unworthy. I've never been arrested. You've been arrested 18 times. This is an inspirational and empowering. But we're about run out of time. Do you have any other gems or pearls that you want to share with our listeners to help them beat the big guys in their own communities?
Well, I think, yeah, that was the first thing you asked me about, was how can people, like, you know, and I would say, like, go to the First Nation people in your area. I would say find other groups that are doing good things and support them. And if you see a gap, create what it is that's needed to fill in that gap. Take courage and realize that you are not alone. There are so many EJ communities out there and communities that are really struggling right now. You can reach out to them. You can learn from the things they've already done. You can work together to create like a bigger movement and to make change in your space. You can beat these big guys. We've done it before. And if you can't beat them one way, you can beat them another way. Just keep fighting and know that we're really appreciated.
Absolutely right. Cherri is so right. And thank you again, Cherri Foytlin, for joining me. And I hope all of you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast on all of your favorite platforms. And remember, no matter who you are, you can beat the big guys. Okay, hold on. I'm just going to stop recording.